Inner Peace Press, bringing soul stories to life.
Hello and welcome to this installment of Inner Peace Press's YouTube channel, where we invite Amy Figs here to talk about her amazing book, Upgraded to Chronic, which she published just last month. Almost Dying Taught Me How to Truly Live. Amy, thank you so much for being here to talk with us about your book today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, great. So we're going to jump right into it. I have just a few questions about your book and just about your writing process in general. So I know it took you some years to write the manuscript for Upgraded to Chronic.
Mhm.
Can you talk about the process of writing your story and how your relationship with the book itself changed over the months it took you to write it?
The book is really a collection. It's a collection of poetry and journal entries, really, that I had written over a time period in my life. So it took many years because that part of my life took many years. And I, the journal entries were very personal and very from my heart. So I had to kind of pull those together. And my poetry is kind of how I process my emotions. My emotions tend to come out kind of in words and phrases, and so when I'm going through something hard, it helps me to write those down, and sometimes I can magically put them together into a poem, which is kind of nice to see my feelings become beautiful even though they're hard. So the book was written while a lot was going on. I was journal entering and writing this poetry while a lot was going on in my life. And then the process of actually putting it together, I'm really glad it took some time because I took some time to heal. I think if I had written this book, or if I put this book together or tried to publish this book at any point during trauma or during my diagnosis or during my divorce, it would have been a much different book because I would have been in a different place and I wouldn't have had perspective, and it would have been very emotional and aggressive and
Mhm.
angry. And I'm glad I'm in the place I am now so that I can look back on these events and the things in this book, and I've done a lot of healing and I'm forgiving and growing. And so this was the perfect time to put the book together.
Mhm.
And now I feel like I can kind of let some of that go and move on with my life.
Mhm. Wow, that's very powerful and impactful, and I love that you were able to process those feelings or emotions on at different times at different levels as well. So, because you did sort of relive some of the emotional components of the stories, even though they'd happened years
Right.
later
Yeah.
while you were writing it. Even if you had
Right.
journaled it before, you still had to process it again as you were editing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It kind of triggered some things, and it was nice to deal with those triggers from this new perspective of healing, and
Mhm.
to see how far I've grown when I look at
Mhm.
those events and when those things kind of come up and bubble up in my emotional, wheelhouse. It was healing to look at it again, to see my growth, and also to
Mhm.
see where I needed to grow a little more.
Mhm. And I suppose that'll be interesting over time, if you read it in 5 or 10 years from now,
Yeah,
just to imagine, like, where you'll be at that time. Um,
absolutely.
I'm curious about your process, how it's different between writing poetry versus writing prose, and if you could explain a little bit about that.
Well, the pros again were journal entries and diary entries and blogs that I had done. So writing those was more stream of conscious, just putting them, almost verbally, just kind of throwing them up onto a page or onto a computer screen, and then going back and kind of putting them together and making them a little more understandable for somebody other than me. And then poetry is it's just something that just kind of comes out, and I don't want to sound flippant because I know some amazing poets that work really hard on their poetry, and I do too. um but it initially just kind of comes out of my head like that. It's just
Mhm.
words just come out, or I'll hear a phrase that sounds really interesting or beautiful or sad or whatever, or I'll be feeling an emotion, and something comes out of that. And so that's how a poem would start for me: is I want to explore
Mhm.
this. I want to explore this phrase, and where can I take it, and how does it fit into my life or how I'm feeling right now?
So it sounds like the poetry is it's starts in an emotional
Yes,
place, and then
absolutely.
there are words that go to it. So you're working to
Right,
express that emotion, whereas the prose is really about storytelling in terms of these
right,
events happened in this way, and it's
right.
right, more of that factual
And
information.
and I think a lot of prose or a lot of my journaling or blogging or whatever is a need to get it outside of my body.
Mm,
When it sits in my body and it sits in my head, it just sits and it makes things harder for me and it dysregulates me. And so to just remove it from my body is kind of a process and kind of
mhm,
it's a healing thing, it's a therapy thing, it's a coping thing.
mhm, mhm. Yes, that's all good, and I'm glad that you bring that up. I say that to people a lot of times in terms of the journaling aspect. That journaling is so healthy because you're getting those emotions out and not bottling them up inside. And, some people, they don't want to write because they don't want it to be seen. And as I say, well,
Right,
burn it, put it
right.
underwater, the ink will
Absolutely.
evaporate or whatever, but
Get it out of
it's a
your body,
really,
get it out of your head.
yes, exactly. Nice. So speaking of the stories that you shared in the book, you shared many moments of raw emotion in your book. Yet you didn't ever tell, well, pretty much you didn't tell the whole story. So you didn't throw anybody under the bus. You didn't have to tell every single detail of what happened to still have this impactful um, uh, well, storytelling process. I'm wondering if that does that sort of editing of details come naturally for you? And how did you know which parts to share?
Editing of details is not my forte. I'm kind of a get it out there, say what you need to say and be done with it. So that was really hard for me to kind of go through and express things differently or make things longer or give more detail to things. And I'm like that in my everyday life. I'm just kind of a I'm just going to say it and then it's going to be done and then I'm not big on small talk. I'm not big on flowery, speech or anything like that. So editing was really hard, but it was interesting to go back and do that because I was able to add some things that I had forgotten or that I hadn't really expressed. So that was again part of the journey of the book and part of the healing for me was, bringing in some things, some feelings and some descriptions that just I just hadn't really delved
Mhm,
into. Um, so yeah, I mean, it kind of also took me away from the book. It made it kind of a separate being from me. And I don't know how to, it took it out of my body. It took it away from me. It made me very disassociated with it, I guess, because editing it and reading over these things over and over again, it just made them not so impactful to me anymore.
mhm,
And kind of desensitized me to the things that I'd actually been through. So it was an interesting kind of process, and I'm talking about feeling like I'm almost dying. And now I'm like, I almost died, like it's in the book, read
right.
about it. Like
Yeah.
it's not
Mhm,
as big of a thing for me anymore.
yeah.
And I forgot about what was the second question?
Oh, just that. How do you know which parts to share?
Oh, um,
Which
I- you know,
details?
I shared parts and details that were kind of already shared with people.
Mm,
There are a lot of things I didn't say. There are a lot of relationships I didn't bring in. I could say specifically with my daughter, who I have we are healing. And so our story isn't for public knowledge
mhm, mhm,
necessarily. We have some things that we've worked through and there's a lot of love there, and a lot of respect for her privacy. Um, and there's just a lot of things that people don't need to know. I think you get the whole story without some of those
mhm,
details.
mhm. Nice, nice. Thank you for sharing that. Um, I have one more question for you,
Sure.
and that is, when did you start writing poetry? And how has your approach to writing poetry changed since you started?
I started writing poetry in high school. I should have brought one of my poems. They were
Oh,
very
yeah.
angsty teen poems, and it probably was more for assignments and attention than it was for processing of emotion when I was a teenager. And everything was very dramatic. I think there was one about a knife stabbing me in the back in the dark, meaning that a friend had
Mm,
stabbed me in the back.
mm,
But and I've always kind of had a propensity to write poetry and just essays and things like that. Uh, as I went to college and I took classes and I wrote in college, and then just as an adult and having kids and being married and having jobs, I put it on the back burner and I didn't do a lot of
mm,
writing. And I can remember my husband was a musician and wrote a lot of his own songs, and I thought, oh, that would be kind of fun. I feel like I could write some songs, but he didn't really encourage it and I didn't really push it. So
mm,
the fire kind of started at that point, probably midway through our marriage. And then the one poem in the book about me hiking in the woods and he was laying dying was the first poem that I wrote officially as something that I explored as being a poet. Um, and that was literally sitting in the woods and not knowing what else to do. And those words just
mm,
kept coming out of me.
mm,
So that began when I started calling myself a poet.
mhm. Beautiful. Nice. Anything that you'd like the readers to know that they didn't get in the book?
Um, I just hope people read it and see that you can go through a lot and still come out okay and still come out
Mhm,
happy, and that life is big and beautiful and scary and tragic, and it's all of those things, but it's worth living.
mhm. Beautiful. Very well said. Well, thank you very much, Amy, for
Thank you.
joining us on the YouTube channel. For those of you who haven't already, please like and subscribe to
Yes.
the Inner Peace Press YouTube channel so that you can always be aware of when new videos are coming up. If you are interested in purchasing a copy of Upgraded to Chronic, there are links in the comments below. You can always go to upgradedtochronic.com in addition to innerpeacepress.com, also to see events that Amy has coming up. She's doing a number of speaking engagements and readings, mostly in Kentucky, but elsewhere as well. So
Open to travel.
yeah, so invite Amy. She'd be happy to
Absolutely.
come and give a talk about the book in your neighborhood. So thank you again, Amy, for being
Thank
here and
you.
for bringing such a beautiful book into the world.
Thank you so much for helping me.
Okay, all right, goodbye.